If a man's honor is this cheap, then let a woman pay the real price.
The August night was a furnace. The Lucky Star Saloon stank of smoke, whiskey, and sweat. Under a crooked oil lamp, Ethan Cole dealt the cards with fingers so smooth, they sounded like silk, tearing that half-smile of his balance somewhere between charm and warning. Deal, Cole. Buck Morrison slammed both palms on the table. By the bar, Sheriff Amos Morrison, Buck's older brother, stood stiff as a fence-post eyes fixed on the game. In the corner, a stranger in a black coat, Mr. Smith, scribbled steadily into a ledger, the dry scratch of his pen keeping time with the saloon's tired piano. The cards whispered. Coins clicked. Every breath in the room hung waiting. Ethan tipped his glass. Lady Luck changes her mind quick, Buck. Buck's grin was all bone. He shoved his chips forward. Then, let's change the stakes. Not just money honor. He set a red 7 upright against the pot. You win, you marry Clara Dawson. You lose, you hang your name in shame before this whole town. The noise died. Tommy Chen muttered, "You can't bet a woman." Mr. Smith didn't look up. "I only record what's spoken before witnesses." The sheriff's voice came slow. "Nobody's forcing marriage, but a man who breaks his word, breaks the axle his wagon rides on." Ethan glanced around the men who'd drunk with him, cheered him, sworn he never missed. He could walk away, saddle up, disappear, under strange stars. But running meant letting someone else define his name. He placed his hand flat on the table. Deal. Cards moved. Sweat beaded. Ethan drew 3 3-10s clean as fate. Buck took one, confidence swelling like bad weather. They turned their hands. Buck showed 2 pairs. Ethan laid his 3-10 slow and soft, and the saloon gasped. Buck's mouth twitched. "Then we're having a wedding," he sneered, but his glance slid toward Mr. Smith and the sheriff's badge gleaming like a silent witness. The batwing doors slammed open. Clara Dawson stepped inside, wrapped in a pale green shawl. She didn't look at the money or the men. She walked straight through the heat and stopped before Buck. Crack. Her palm struck his cheek. The sound cut the air like a gunshot. "If a man's honor is this cheap," she said, voice calm as cold water, "then let a woman pay the real price." Her dark eyes turned to Ethan. "You meant what you said. Then meet me at the church on Saturday. If you lied, say it here." Ethan swallowed hard. "I meant it." Mr. Smith wrote the words down. Buck rubbed his jaw. The mute girl found her tongue. He growled. Clara didn't flinch. When the wind's strong enough, the weakest tent still knows to fall. She turned and left. The crowd parted like wheat in a sudden gust. When the doors swung shut behind her, the piano dared a single trembling note. Ethan rose, hat in hand. Sheriff Amos nodded once. "Bring your word, Cole. Leave your swagger." Outside, the night hit him like a furnace door opening. Buck's voice followed Saturday. "Cole, the whole town'll go quiet when she says I do." The next morning, the little bell over Dawson and daughter jingled bright against the heat. Sunlight fell on jars of beans and sugar. Malcolm Dawson stood behind the counter, jaw tight as a vice. Clara tied string around a parcel for an old widow, her hands steady. Ethan removed his hat. Saturday. Clara looked up. No hope, no anger, only calm measurement. "Bring your word," she said. "Leave your pride." "I don't have much pride left," he answered, turning before he could find some. Outside, dust rolled in waves. Across the street, Buck leaned in a doorway, rubbing the mark on his cheek. "Don't be late, groom," he called. Ethan kept walking. His shadow stretched long over the boards, thin as a rope hanging between a wedding garland and a noose. And somewhere in Coyote Ridge, the town had already begun counting the days to Saturday. The bet and the noose. The August night in Coyote Ridge burned like God's own forge. Wind carried red dust through the batwing doors of the Lucky Star Saloon and left it hanging in the light like smoke from an invisible fire. The place was full to the rafters, cowhands, miners, drifters, and the kind of men who'd already traded tomorrow for another drink tonight. The piano clattered something halfway between a hymn and a dare, And in the middle of it all sat Ethan Cole, the fastest gun and smoothest liar in the Arizona Territory. Under the yellow lamp cards flashed between his fingers with the easy rhythm of a man who trusted chance more than prayer. The crowd liked watching him. He looked like the kind of man who could make a deck obey, and maybe the world too. He smiled when he dealt that lazy gambler's grin that could charm a rattle off a snake. Across from him, Buck Morrison rolled his shoulders and pushed a stack of chips forward. "Deal Cole," he rasped. "Night's short, and I aim to win something worth the trouble." "Your money's never worth the trouble," Ethan said, cutting the deck. The cards whispered like secrets. Behind Buck stood his brother, Sheriff Amos Morrison Badge, catching the lamplight, arms folded. Beside the bar, a stranger in a black coat, Mr. Smith, kept to the shadows, writing neatly into a small ledger. He'd introduced himself only as a legal witness from Laramie County, the kind of man who always seems to appear when stories turn to sin. Ethan dealt 5, each leaned back and poured himself another shot. Gentlemen, try not to cry when Lady Luck changes her dress. The laughter that followed was sharp and nervous. Coins clinked, glasses scraped. Outside, a gust rattled the shutters like a warning. Buck lifted his cards, face carved from granite. "Let's make it worth the sweat." He shoved the rest of his chips in. "I'm raising 60 and adding this." He dropped a small pouch that clacked heavy with gold dust. "Clean from my own claim." Ethan raised a brow. "That's a mighty lot of faith in 4 corners of pasteboard." Buck's grin was thin. "Faith Cole, faith's for preachers. This here's pride." Mr. Smith's pen scratched faster. The sheriff sighed. "Keep it civil, boys." Ethan matched the bet easy. "Let's see if pride plays better than luck." They drew. Ethan took 2, Buck took 1. The room leaned in. "Show it," Ethan said. Buck laid down his hand, 2 queens, 2 eights. "Decent, not holy." Ethan turned over his own 3 tens lined up neat as soldiers. The room erupted. Someone cheered. Someone cursed, and Chester the piano man hit a triumphant chord he hadn't used in years. Buck's jaw twitched. "Ain't over yet," he muttered, eyes glittering mean. "You got luck, Cole. Let's see if you got nerve." Ethan frowned. "Speak plain." Buck leaned forward, the lamp catching the sweat on his brow. "You talk big about honor. Let's wager that. You win, you marry the quiet shopkeeper's daughter, Clara Dawson. You lose, you admit in front of every soul here that your word ain't worth the whiskey you drink." A murmur swept the saloon. Chairs creaked. Tommy Chen, the young store clerk, said, "You can't bet a woman, Buck." "I can, if it's her reputation. He's been flirting with all over town." Buck shot back. "Ain't that right? Cole folks seen you at her daddy's counter, all smiles." Ethan's knuckles tightened on his glass. "I pay for supplies, not gossip." Buck laughed. "Then pay with your pride." Mr. Smith looked up from his ledger. "Gentlemen, I remind you, anything said here before witnesses may be entered into record." The sheriff's voice was dry as the desert. "A man's only as good as his word, Cole. Don't give one you can't keep." Ethan stared at the cards, at the sweat gleaming on them like guilt. He'd lived by a code too thin to write down. Never cheat, never run, never break your word. Now the whole damn town waited to see if that code meant anything. He set his glass aside. "Fine. Deal the cards." The crowd exhaled as if a fuse had been lit. The piano went silent. The only sound was the soft slap of cards against felt. Ethan picked up his hand, kings and aces again. Good, strong do. He played without blinking. The final raise came down to every coin he owned and every ounce of pride left in the room. When the last card turned, Buck's face broke into a slow, vicious grin. 4 sevens, he said. "Full house, don't beat that." Laughter roared cruel and loud. Buck raked the pot toward him. "Guess you're a marrying man after all." Ethan sat still. The sheriff's boots shifted on the boards. Mr. Smith's pen glided. "Wager confirmed," he murmured. "This is madness," Ethan said. "We were drunk." Mr. Smith didn't even blink. "You were witnessed." The sheriff sighed. "You'll do right by it, Cole. Or you'll be known for a liar." Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the ridge, or maybe it was just the echo of laughter. Ethan stood. "You win, Buck. Enjoy it while you can." Then the saloon doors burst open. A hot gust swept through, carrying dust and the faint scent of lavender soap. The room fell silent. as Clara Dawson stepped inside. She wore a plain blue dress and a shawl the color of rainwater. Her dark hair was pulled back, her eyes steady and unreadable, the kind of quiet that silences noise just by existing. "Miss Dawson," the sheriff said carefully. She didn't answer. She walked straight to the table, her boots making small, deliberate sounds on the floorboard. Buck stood to greet her, half grin, half sneer. "Evening, Clara." Her hand moved faster than his smirk. Crack. The slap echoed like a pistol shot. Buck staggered, eyes wide. "If a man's honor is a game," Clara said softly, "then let's see who wins when the cards run out." She turned to Ethan. "You made a promise before witnesses." "You mean it?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." "Then meet me at the church on Saturday." Her gaze cut through him. "And come with truth, not swagger." The sheriff nodded, almost respectful. "Mr. Smith wrote another line in his book." Buck touched his cheek and laughed without humor. "Guess the mute girl found her tongue." Clara looked at him with calm that could freeze a fire. "You'll need both hands to hold your pride now, Buck. One to keep it, and one to wipe that slap." She turned and walked out. The crowd parted like prairie grass before rain. When the batwing swung shut behind her, the saloon exhaled as if everyone had been holding breath too long. Ethan put on his hat. "Saturday," he said quietly. "Saturday," the sheriff repeated. "And don't forget your word." Buck's laugh followed Ethan into the night. "Bring a rope, Cole. Every wedding's got one." Morning hit Coyote Ridge, hard and bright. Dust shimmered over Main Street, and every soul from the barber to the blacksmith was already whispering. A gambler marrying a shopkeeper's daughter, nothing spread faster than scandal with sunlight on it. The bell above Dawson and Daughter General Store chimed as Ethan pushed the door open. Inside smelled of coffee leather and soap, the scent of steadier lives. Shelves lined the walls, neat as scripture. Behind the counter stood Malcolm Dawson, gray-haired and stern, his hands steady on the ledger. Clara stood beside him, wrapping sugar and flour in brown paper. "Mr. Cole," Malcolm said without warmth. "Mr. Dawson." Ethan removed his hat. The silence between them was a bridge over thin ice. "I suppose you've heard the talk," Malcolm said. "The whole town has." "Yes, sir." Clara finished tying the parcel and looked up. Her eyes were as dark as the desert before dawn. "Why are you here, Mr. Cole?" "To tell you it was a fool's game. You shouldn't have to bear." "I'm not the one who made the bet," she interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried truth like steel. "You did." Ethan exhaled. "Then let me make it right." "I'll pay." "I don't want your money," she said. "I want you to keep your word." Malcolm's brow furrowed. "Clara." She turned to her father. "You always said a man's word was his measure. Let's see if it still is." Then back to Ethan. "Saturday, 2:00. Reverend Morrison will be waiting." Ethan felt the trap close around him, the same as a cage, but it was built of his own promises. "If that's your wish, Miss Dawson." "It's not," she said quietly. "It's my decision." He nodded, once turned, and walked out. Behind him the doorbell jingled bright and final. Outside the sun was merciless. Heat shimmered off the dirt road. Across the street Buck leaned against a post, rubbing the fading red mark on his cheek. "Don't be late, groom," he drawled. "Wouldn't want the lady to think you scared." Ethan kept walking. "You got your laugh, Buck. Enjoy it." "Oh, I will. Whole town will. Maybe I'll even bring a gift, a rope, so you remember what honor costs." Ethan stopped, turned just enough to meet his eyes. "You play with fire long enough, you end up tasting the smoke." Buck's grin didn't move. "We'll see who burns first." That night, Coyote Ridge couldn't stop talking. At the saloon, men replayed every word. At the dressmakers, women whispered whether Clara had lost her mind or found it. By the livery, bets piled higher than haystacks odds on how long the marriage would last, whether Ethan would show at all, whether the sheriff would have to drag him there. Ethan lay in his rented room above the saddle shop, hat over his eyes, staring at the ceiling until dawn turned the boards pale. The desert wind moaned through cracks in the wall. He remembered Clara's voice, "Bring your truth, not your swagger." It echoed in his chest like a bullet that had missed but still wounded. By sunrise, he knew one thing: he could run as he always had, or he could stay and prove that the name Ethan Cole still meant something worth carrying. When the church bell rang that morning for regular service, he was already sitting on the steps outside, hat in hand, watching the dust swirl across Main Street. People passed, staring but pretending not to. For once he didn't care. He'd made a promise. He would keep it. Later that day, the sheriff found him sitting on the hitch rail outside the jailhouse, sharpening a knife he didn't need sharpened. "Town's still talking," Amos said. "Never seen gossip move this fast." "Fast horse," Ethan muttered. "Wish I could saddle it." "You sure about this marriage?" "No." He met the sheriff's eyes. "But I'm sure I ain't gonna be called a liar." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Reckon that's something." He started to walk away, then paused. "You know, Cole, sometimes a man jumps into the river just to prove he ain't scared of drowning. Doesn't mean he can swim." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Guess I'll find out Saturday." By Wednesday, the whole territory seemed to breathe in rhythm with the rumor. Mrs. Henderson was already sewing a simple white dress for Clara. The ladies' auxiliary baked a cake no one believed would be eaten. Even the preacher polished his Bible cover twice. Thursday evening, Ethan rode out to the ridge beyond town, where the desert opened wide and empty. The sunset poured red over the stones like spilled wine. He thought of the road of the freedom it promised, and the loneliness it always delivered. He'd lived half his life in motion. Maybe it was time to see what standing still felt like. When he rode back after dark, he passed Buck outside the saloon. The man raised a glass. 2 days, Cole. "Keep count," Ethan said. "You'll run out of fingers." Buck's laugh chased him down the street, cruel and hollow. Friday dawned gold and quiet. Clara was already awake before sunrise, sweeping the store porch, pretending the whispers didn't reach her. She heard them anyway. Poor girl, brave girl, foolish girl. She ignored them all. In her father's back room, folded on a chair, lay the white dress Mrs. Henderson had brought. Plain cotton lace at the cuffs. When Clara touched it, the fabric felt heavier than it should, like a decision made solid. Malcolm watched from the doorway. "You don't have to do this." She tied the last ribbon around a parcel of sugar. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because everyone keeps saying I'm silent." She turned to face him. "This is me speaking." He didn't argue. A father knows when his child's mind has gone past changing. That night, Ethan walked the length of Main Street 3 times before heading home. The town was dark, still as prayer. At the edge of the boardwalk, he paused, staring toward the distant light in the Dawsons' window. He wondered if she was afraid. He wondered if she hated him. He wondered if this madness could ever turn into something else. The desert wind rose, carrying a whisper that could have been his own heartbeat or the sound of a far-off train. Either way, it said the same thing: don't run. He went inside, loaded his gun, then unloaded it again. Some habits die only when you decide to outlive them. When dawn came on Saturday, Ethan was already dressed in a clean white shirt and a black vest that smelled faintly of gun oil and hope. The mirror showed a stranger, a man trying maybe to be good. The bell of St. Andrew's Church tolled noon. Folks gathered like it was a show. Buck stood near the front steps, grin sharp as barbed wire. Sheriff Amos waited inside with folded arms. And when Clara arrived, walking on her father's arm beneath the blazing sun, the crowd fell silent, as if the desert itself held its breath. Ethan stepped forward to meet her. The bell of St. Andrew's Church rang once, twice, then again, each toll rolling across Coyote Ridge like thunder that refused to fade. The whole town had come. They filled the dusty pews, and the open doors' faces glistening under the August sun, drawn not by faith but by curiosity. A gambler and a shopkeeper's daughter, no sermon could compete with that. Ethan Cole stood at the altar hat, clutched tight boots polished out of guilt more than pride. The old wood smelled of candle smoke and pine oil. Beside him, Reverend Morrison waited with the steady patience of a man who had seen too many people make promises they didn't understand. Behind them, Sheriff Amos Morrison stood as quiet witness, the badge on his chest catching each flare of sunlight. And near the back, Mr. Smith sat alone, his black ledger open like judgment itself. Then the doors opened. Clara Dawson stepped in, her father's arm firm under her hand. She wore a simple white dress, cotton, and modest but light, seemed to follow her anyway. The murmurs died. Malcolm Dawson's face was a wall of sorrow and strength. He led his daughter down the aisle and placed her hand in Ethan's. Their eyes met hers, steady, his uncertain, and the air between them thickened into something neither of them could name. "Do you come here of your own will?" Reverend Morrison asked. Ethan's voice was low. "I do." "And you, Clara Dawson?" She met Ethan's eyes. "I do." The words echoed off timber beams. A pair of gold rings lay on the Bible, warm from the Reverend's palm. Ethan slipped one onto her finger. His hand trembled once, then steadied. Clara's hand was small but sure as she did the same. The Reverend smiled faintly, closing the book. "Then before God and this town you are husband and wife. You may seal your vow," he said. Ethan hesitated, breath shallow, then leaned in. Their lips met, soft, uncertain, nothing like the crowd expected. But when they parted, the church was utterly still. A moment later, applause began, hesitant at first, then rolling like summer rain. It wasn't celebration, it was relief. They stepped outside to blinding sunlight. Petals fell, thrown by hands unsure whether they meant blessing or mockery. Then the laughter stopped. Buck Morrison was waiting by the fence, hat pushed back, grin sharp as a knife. "Well now," he drawled, "don't you two make a picture. Guess love really can be bought with cards." Ethan met his stare. "You lost, Buck. Accept it." Buck's eyes darkened. "Oh, I ain't lost. I just haven't collected yet." The sheriff took one step forward, hand resting near his holster. Buck smirked, tipped his hat, and walked off the dust, swallowing him whole. Malcolm Dawson turned to Ethan. "There's a house," he said roughly, "out on Cottonwood Lane. 2 rooms, needs fixing. It's hers. You'll start there." Ethan nodded. "Thank you, sir." That night, they arrived under a sky burning with stars. The house sat at the edge of town, blue door, small porch, one window lit by a lantern. Inside, a table, 2 chairs, a bed, a stove that groaned with age. Simple. Honest. Clara stood in the doorway, gaze sweeping over the room. "It's quiet." "I can fix that," Ethan said gently. "Some quiet's worth keeping," she replied. They unpacked what little they had, her books, his saddlebag. He turned to her awkwardly. "You can have the bed. I'll take the cot." Her eyes softened. "No, I'll take the storeroom. For now." He nodded. "All right." Silence fell thick, but not cruel. Ethan built a small fire, the crackle filling the emptiness. Clara brewed coffee, the smell grounding them both. They sat across from each other, unsure how to begin the kind of conversation that might take a lifetime. Outside, the night wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves. Inside, the flame caught something fragile between them, trust maybe, or at least the first spark of it. Then came the knock. 3 hard raps on the door. Ethan's hand went to his belt by instinct, but his gun was on the shelf. He opened it anyway. Buck Morrison stood on the porch, a coil of new hemp rope slung over his arm, 2 of his men smirking behind him. "Thought I'd bring you a wedding gift," he said, tossing the rope onto the floorboards. "You'll need it when the honeymoon ends." Ethan stepped forward, eyes hard. "You've had your fun. Leave." Buck's grin widened. "You planning to make me?" Before Ethan could move, a calm voice cut through the heat. "I said leave." Clara had come to stand beside him, shawl around her shoulders, eyes bright as glass. Buck's smirk faltered for half a heartbeat. "Well, the mute bride talks after all," he said. "Maybe you'll scream too when he stopped." The sheriff's voice carried from the gate. "That's enough, Buck." Buck's tongue clicked. He spat in the dust, turned, and stalked off. His laughter trailed behind like a bad smell. Ethan shut the doorjaw tight. He picked up the rope, cut it into short pieces, and fed them into the fire until all that remained was curling smoke. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For burning the noose before it burned us." The flame snapped. Shadows danced over her face. She looked different in that light. Still steady, still quiet, but alive in a way he hadn't seen before. He realized suddenly that this marriage might not be a punishment. It might be a beginning. Later, when she'd gone to her narrow bed, and the lamp burned low, Ethan lay awake on the couch. The ring on his finger felt strange, but not wrong. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods like a lullaby that remembered both danger and grace. He thought of the rope of the kiss of her voice when she said, "I do clear, fearless, honest." He smiled despite himself. Morning came with the smell of biscuits and coffee. Clara was already dressed, braid over one shoulder, frying pan in hand. "Breakfast," she said. "He Saturday you cook better than you gamble." She looked up surprised by the teasing. "And you, I fix shutters. I'll prove it after breakfast." They ate in companionable silence, the kind that meant more than words. When they were done, he offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked down Cottonwood Lane toward town. People watched from windows, whispering, but neither of them cared. For once Ethan didn't feel like a drifter. And Clara, she didn't feel invisible. At the corner of Main Street they paused. She turned to him. 6 o'clock supper, she said. "I'll bring nails," he replied. Her smile was small, real. "Don't be late, husband." As he watched her walk toward the general store, sunlight flaring around her, he felt something he hadn't, in years, peace, mixed with fear, the kind that means a man finally has something to lose. Behind him the cottonwood leaves shimmered, whispering secrets. Only the wind understood. And far beyond the ridge, a thin cloud of dust began to rise, riders coming fast. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight in the blue-doored house, the fire would burn gentle, and two people who hadn't chosen each other would start learning how to stay. The first dawn after the wedding rose quiet and amber over Coyote Ridge. The desert smelled of dust, sun-warmed sage, and beginnings that didn't know what they were yet. Inside the small blue-doored house on Cottonwood Lane, Ethan Cole woke to the sound of a kettle whistling and the soft clatter of dishes, a sound he hadn't heard in years, not since before he'd started living by dice and gunpowder. For a long moment, he just lay still, listening. The air was warm, heavy, with a scent of brewing coffee and fresh bread. There was no laughter, no piano, no crowd. Only one woman's careful footsteps moving through his silence, as though she were afraid to disturb it. He rubbed his eyes, sat up, and stared at the gold band on his left hand. The ring still looked foreign there, like a borrowed truth he hadn't earned. When he walked into the main room, Clara Dawson, now Clara Cole, was at the stove. She wore a gray dress with sleeves rolled past her elbows, hair braided down her back. The morning light fell across her face, pale and steady like water over stone. Morning, Ethan said. She didn't turn. "Coffee's ready. Cups are clean. Help yourself." He poured a cup, sat at the small table, and tried to remember how to act like a husband. The chair creaked under him. "You wake before sunrise, I always have," she said, setting a plate of biscuits and jam in front of him. "The store opened early when Father ran it alone. Habit doesn't break easy." He bit into a biscuit. It was good, crisp at the edges, soft inside. He wasn't sure if the warmth he felt came from the food or the way she moved around the room like it already belonged to her. "You plan to stay in today?" he asked. "I plan to make this place livable." She glanced toward the window. "You?" He smiled faintly. "I'll check the fence, see if it's strong enough to keep the dust out." "That's a hopeless cause," she murmured, but there was humor in it, dry and almost gentle. Outside the desert shimmered pale and merciless. Ethan worked with a hammer and sweat nails shining like bits of promise. Each strike steadied him a rhythm older than gambling, older than pride. From the porch, Clara watched for a while, arms folded. When he caught her gaze, she looked away, pretending to wipe her hands on her apron. But the corner of her mouth curved slightly. At noon, she brought him water. "You'll cook yourself if you don't stop." "Hard to burn what's already leather," he said. She offered the jug, and their fingers brushed. A spark, quick and dangerous. Both pretended not to feel it. "Thank you, Clara," he said deliberately, using her name. She paused, startled by the way it sounded from him, rough-edged but honest. "You're welcome, Ethan." It was the first time she had said his name aloud. That afternoon the wind picked up. A storm wasn't coming, not yet, but the sky had that look like it was remembering what thunder felt like. Ethan leaned his hammer against the rail and wiped his brow. From across the road, a horse galloped up, fast, kicking dust like smoke. It was Tommy Chen, the store clerk, his hat tilted back, worry etched deep in his young face. "Ethan," he called. "You better come to town." Ethan stepped forward. "Why, Buck Morrison's in the saloon, drunk, and talking loud. Says the marriage ain't legal, says you tricked the reverend and bought her father off. Half the town's listening. Clara had come out onto the porch drying her hands. He's lying, she said. Ethan nodded. That's what Buck does best. He turned to Tommy. Tell the sheriff I'll settle it tomorrow. Tommy shook his head. You sure he's looking for a fight? I'm looking for quiet, Ethan said. That's harder to find than fights. Tommy left relief and fear tangled in his posture. When he was gone, Clara's voice broke the stillness. He won't stop until you give him something else to talk about. Ethan smiled without humor. Then maybe I will. That evening after supper they sat outside on the porch. The world smelled of cooling earth and wood smoke. Somewhere a coyote called long and lonesome. Ethan leaned against the post cigarette, glowing faint in the dusk. You always this quiet. Only around men who talk too much, she said. He chuckled. Fair. They fell into an easy silence. The sky turned violet. The wind made the cottonwood leaves whisper secrets neither of them wanted to translate. After a while, Clara spoke. When I was little, I used to imagine marriage as peace. I thought love would sound like this quiet, steady, safe. And now she glanced at him. Now I think peace is something you earn, not something you're given. Ethan studied her face, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of dreams she didn't believe in anymore. You're wiser than most. I've had practice, she said. He looked away, guilt tugging at his chest. You didn't deserve to be dragged into my mess, Clara. She folded her hands in her lap. I'm not a child, Ethan. I made my choice. That doesn't mean it was fair. No, she said softly. But fairness is a luxury. I'll settle for truth. He nodded, staring out toward the ridges. Truth is I'm trying. Don't know if that's enough. It's a start, she said. They went inside when the first chill touched the air. Clara lit a lamp. The flame painted the room in gold and shadow. Ethan lingered by the window, restless. You ever think about leaving? She asked suddenly. He turned. You mean this town? I mean all of it. Coyote Ridge, the desert, the past. He thought of the road that used to feel like freedom, now just a long, empty line leading nowhere. Used to, he said. Now I think I'd rather stay still for once. But I ain't sure I remember how. Then learn, she said simply. He smiled. You make it sound easy. Nothing's easy, Clara replied, but some things are worth the work. The lamp flickered, casting her face in half light. For a heartbeat, Ethan imagined stepping closer, imagined touching her cheek. Instead, he said quietly, Thank you. For what? For not being afraid of me. I'm afraid of many things, she said, just not you. The words hit him deeper than he expected. Later that night, wind rattled the shutters. Ethan woke to the sound of a horse outside. Instinct pulled him from bed. His hand found the gun before his eyes found the window. Clara's voice came softly from the door. What is it? Someone's out there. They waited. The hoofbeats stopped. Then a knock. 3 sharp raps. Ethan opened the door, revolver low. Malcolm Dawson stood on the porch, face grim, coat flapping in the wind. Sorry to wake you, he said, stepping inside, but you need to see this. He handed Ethan a folded poster, edges torn and dusty. Ethan unfolded it slowly. A face stared back, his own younger Meaner. Wanted for murder. Tucson territory. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. My God, Ethan exhaled. It ain't what it looks like. Malcolm nodded once. Buck found this. He's spreading it around, saying you shot a man in cold blood. Sheriff's keeping quiet for now, but the town's listening. Ethan's jaw clenched. That poster's 6 years old. I was cleared. Self-defense. But rumors don't care about truth. Clara took the paper from his hand, studied it for a long time. You could have told me. I was going to, he said, after I earned a reason for you to believe me. Something softened in her expression, not forgiveness yet, but maybe the shape of it. Then start earning now. Malcolm looked between them, then toward the door. I'll do what I can to quiet Buck, but this town loves a story, and you gave him a good one. When he was gone, Ethan sank into the chair by the cold hearth. Clara poured water, set it in front of him. Drink, she said. He obeyed. His hand trembled just enough for her to notice. "You're not the man in that poster anymore," she said finally. He looked up surprised. "You don't know that." "I know what I see," she replied, "and I've watched you fix fences and swallow pride. That counts for something." He smiled faintly. "You're too kind." "I'm practical," she said. "If you were a murderer, you'd have killed Buck by now." He laughed, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. It sounded rusty, unused. "Fair point," he said. The wind howled again, shaking the windows. Clara closed them, then added a log to the fire. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll go to the sheriff. End it properly. You don't have to stand beside me for that." "Yes," she said quietly. "I do. You're my husband. Whether I wanted that or not, it's true now. And truth deserves a witness." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. "You're something else, Clara." "So I've been told," she said, sitting opposite him. They sat in the flicker of firelight, two people caught between past sins and new beginnings. After a while, he spoke again, voice softer. "When this started, I thought you were the quietest woman I'd ever met. And now I think you just save your words for when they matter." Her lips curved slightly. "Maybe that's why you talk enough for both of us." He grinned. "Maybe." The clock ticked. The fire crackled. Outside, the desert wind moved through the cottonwoods, carrying a whisper that sounded almost like a blessing. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the wanted poster, curling in the heat of the fire, until the edges blackened. Clara didn't stop him. She just watched as the last piece of his past turned to ash. When it was gone, she said quietly, "We start again tomorrow." He nodded. "We start again." For the first time since that cursed bet, Ethan Cole believed he might actually mean it. The morning after Malcolm brought the wanted poster, Coyote Ridge woke under a sky the color of bruised pewter. The wind had weight to it, whispering of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Inside the small, blue-doored house, Ethan Cole strapped on his gun belt with the weariness of a man walking back into an old habit. Clara watched from the table, her fingers still on a folded letter the sheriff had written at dawn, proof that the Tucson killing had been ruled self-defense. The words were simple legal, but they meant freedom. "You don't have to go," she said quietly. "Buck's shouting my name in the saloon," he replied. "If I don't show up, he wins." "Then walk in sober," she said. "Let truth do your fighting." Ethan met her gaze, steady brown, unafraid. "That your way of praying for me? It's my way of keeping you alive." He smiled faintly. "That'll do." Main Street was already watching when he came. The Lucky Star's doors banged open, and Buck Morrison leaned against the bar with a grin too wide for the room. "Well, look who's crawled in from under his wife's skirts." Ethan didn't flinch. "You done talking, Buck?" "Not near," Buck said. "That letter you waved around probably forged. Word is you killed that man for cheating you, same as you killed your father's name." Laughter rippled uneasy. Ethan's jaw tightened. Before he could speak, the door opened again, and Clara walked in. The saloon went still. She wore a plain gray dress, her braid pulled tight. No hat, no shawl, just a look that silenced half the room. She crossed to the table and laid the sheriff's letter flat in the lamplight. "Read," she said. Out loud. The sheriff himself stepped in behind her, nodding once. "That's my seal. Tucson's judge signed it. Ethan Cole's clear." Buck's smirk faltered. "Paper don't change what kind of man he is." "Maybe not," Clara said, "but it says what kind of liar you are." A low murmur of approval spread through the room. Buck's hand twitched near his gun, but the sheriff's voice cut like thunder. "Enough." Buck spat on the floor and stalked out into daylight. Ethan turned to Clara. "You didn't have to do that. I told you truth does the fighting." By afternoon, the wind had shifted. Dust lifted off the ridge like ghosts. Ethan stood outside, hammering the last nail into a fence post, when the first raindrop hit his hand. Thick, cold, heavy. "Storm's coming," Clara called from the porch. "I see it," he said. The horizon was already dark clouds, rolling like cavalry. They worked together in silence, tying shutters, bringing in tools. By the time the rain broke, it came with a fury that rattled the bones of the house. Thunder cracked so close, it shook the windows. Water forced its way through the roof seam, dripping steady into the tin bucket Clara set under it. Lightning flashed white and merciless. Ethan checked the barn through the window, saw the roof lift just once like a breath before breaking. "The barn," he shouted. You can't. I can. He tied a rope around his waist, the other end to the hearth beam. If I don't come back, pull. She wanted to argue, but his eyes left no room. Be quick, she said. He stepped into the storm, swallowed whole. The wind hit him like a wall. Every step to the barn was a fight. He climbed, the ladder drove nails, with frozen hands cursed the thunder that swallowed each strike. The roof shuddered, then settled. He slid down, half falling, half flying the rope, jerking at his waist, like the house itself refusing to lose him. Inside, Clara pulled him in, drenched and shaking. She pushed him toward the fire and threw a towel across his shoulders. Fool, she muttered, but her hands trembled with relief. Roof's ugly, he said, teeth chattering, but it's stayin'. Then we're even, she said. You saved the barn, I saved you. They sat by the hearth while the storm roared, the bucket between them filling with steady rhythm. Rain hammered, wind screamed, but the house held, and so did they. By dawn the storm was gone. The world outside glowed strange and new, the air washed clean. They stepped out together and stopped. The barn stood crooked but whole. The garden was drowned, the fence half gone. Beyond the cottonwoods, a dark smear of dust was moving toward town. Riders. Stay inside, Ethan said. Not a chance. Clara disappeared into the house and came back with her Winchester. I've got cover from the doorway. He didn't argue. Old instincts took over. He checked his revolver, rolled his shoulders, and stepped into the yard as 5 men reigned, in guns, low faces, mean. The leader's scar caught the morning light. Jake Thornton, Ethan said. Didn't think you'd crawl this far north. Jake grinned. Crawlin's what you call livin' now. Heard you got yourself a wife. Heard she's got more backbone than sense. Say what you came to say, Ethan replied. Jake's eyes flicked toward the doorway. Clara stood there, rifle steady, calm as stone. You don't want to do this, Jake, she said. Jake laughed. Lady, I've wanted to do this for years. He reached for his gun. Ethan didn't move. Clara fired first. The bullet split the air and shattered the rock beside Jake's boot. Dust sprayed his leg. He froze. Next one, she said quietly. Won't miss. The men shifted in their saddles. None of them wanted to die for Jake's pride. One spat. Another muttered, Let's ride. Jake glared at Ethan. This ain't over. Ethan shrugged. Then next time bring flowers. Jake turned his horse. They rode off, dust trailing like smoke from a dying fire. When they were gone, Ethan turned to Clara. You could have shot him. I didn't need to, she said. Fear's cleaner. He laughed, breathless. You're something else. You keep saying that. Because it's true. They stood in the yard, soaked and sunlit, the smell of wet earth rising around them. For a moment the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of promise instead of a cage. Later, as the day cooled, Malcolm Dawson came with a wagon of shingles. Storm took half the county, he said. You two fared better than most. We had practice, Clara said, glancing at Ethan. Malcolm smiled. That's marriage for you. Storms, nails, and mercy. They worked till sunset, the 3 of them, fixing what they could. When Malcolm left, the blue door closed softly behind him. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and new lumber. Ethan poured 2 cups. We survived the storm, he said. We survived each other, Clara corrected. He chuckled. That too. They sat by the fire, shoulders brushing. The bucket under the leak was empty now. Outside, the cottonwoods whispered in the wind, soft as applause. You ever think we'd make it this far, he asked. I didn't think I'd make it anywhere, she said. But I like where I am. He looked at her, then really looked, the steadiness, the warmth, the quiet strength that had stopped bullets and gossip alike. Clara, he said, voice low, thank you. For stayin'. For fightin' when I wouldn't. She met his gaze unflinching. Don't thank me. Just keep standin' beside me. He nodded. I can do that. Outside, the last of the storm clouds drifted east, pink and silver in the setting Sunday. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Jake Thornton would nurse his pride and plan his return. But for now, peace, real and fragile, settled over Cottonwood Lane. Inside the little house, 2 people who hadn't chosen each other sat in quiet that finally felt like home. And when Ethan reached for her hand, Clara didn't pull away. The storm rinsed Coyote Ridge so clean the boards looked scrubbed and the air tasted like tin. For a day and a half the town moved with the reverence people save for churches and funerals. Men hammered without cussing. Women traded yeast and stories on porches glistening a new color of brown. The cottonwoods along Cottonwood Lane shook themselves dry and stood watch like tall, whispering sheriffs. At the blue-doored house, Ethan reset nails the wind had tried to teach bad habits. He braced the eaves, trued the back gate, planed a swollen jam that had learned to sulk. Clara scrubbed the storm's fingerprints from the floorboards, then stitched indigo curtains, flecked with small white stitches that looked like a sky somebody could own. "You brought the night inside," Ethan said, stepping back to admire the scatter of hand-sewn stars. "They keep shining when our lamp gives up," Clara answered, knotting the last thread with neat certainty. Work made a rhythm that felt like sanity. In the mornings, Ethan took his toolbox down Main Street and rented his hands to whatever paid a sagging corral, a stubborn latch, a buckboard that wanted its wheel reminded who was boss. In the afternoons, Clara helped Malcolm at the store, counting beans, bagging flour, and sorting gossip from inventory. At dusk, they returned to the Blue Door by different paths and arrived without trying at the same time. If the town still whispered, the storm had put a finger to its lips. Sheriff Amos had nailed the Tucson letter beside the tax notices where every man with a grudge could read his way out of it. Buck Morrison kept to the lucky star and to shadows, drinking his shame into shapes that didn't last. Jake Thornton had not been seen, which was worse than seeing him. On the third morning, Clara carried 2 baskets toward the store for lamp oil and flour. Main Street had the industrious fragrance of wet leather soap and wood shaving. The blacksmith's hammer rang a reasonable argument. Children used the fallen sign behind the livery to build a fort and declare a republic. When the bell over the store door gave its quick, bright confession, Malcolm looked up with relief. "You're early," he said, sliding a crate of sugar on the counter. "Which I like. Ladies' opinions got here first." By the thread case stood Mrs. Henderson, practical, amused, and Alma Pike with a voice like a brightly painted wagon. Clara Alma sang, "Jeremiah told me how you stared down those men with your rifle. Mercy, I near fainted picturing you." "Your heart faints whenever a door slams," Mrs. Henderson said dryly. Alma lowered her voice to a theatrical whisper. "I told Jeremiah that Clara should teach the church ladies to shoot. Might convince men to be punctual. I was joking, of course." "Why?" Clara asked. Alma blinked. "Why? What?" "Why joke?" Clara set her baskets down. "Church ladies hold babies, buckets, Bibles, and husbands who can't hold their liquor. A rifle weighs less than any of those." Mrs. Henderson's eyes brightened. "I'll sew slings if you teach." Alma tried 3 expressions and landed on respect. "If you start a class, I'll come. Don't tell Jeremiah until I outshoot him." Saturday, Clara heard herself say the word arriving as ready as bread. Behind the livery, 2 hours after noon. "Bring your rifle if you have one. If you don't, bring your nerve." Mrs. Henderson clapped softly, as if not to scare the idea away. "I'll paint targets. Big circles for pride, small ones for ambition." When Clara left with full baskets, the street looked wider by 2 handspans. Halfway home, she met Ethan, who noticed before she spoke. "You look like the sun climbed out of your pocket," he said. "I signed myself into trouble," she answered, and then smiled. "A shooting class for women." He laughed, delighted and helpless. "I'll keep fools and drunks from accidentally stepping into the line. You think I need guarding?" "No," he said, grin crooked. "I think they do." In the afternoon, Ethan rehung a door at the undertaker's, the only place in town where silence was contagious, then crossed the square into Buck Morrison's shadow. Buck left the barber shop awning like a man abandoning an alibi hat, tipped low grin, pretending it had never met humility. "Cole, Buck, you made me a fool in front of everyone." "No," Ethan said. "You did." Buck looked at the dirt like it was a mirror. "Jake's up in the hills. He don't forgive. Word is he hired Silas Pike." "Alma's kin?" Ethan asked. "Brother." Buck tapped his own cheek, tracing a scar that wasn't there. "Silas is the one with the knife signature." "Why tell me?" Buck rocked heel to toe. It made him look briefly like a boy choosing honesty because lying would take more work. "Because "I ain't all the way a bastard," he said. "And I don't want to watch you die and then remember I kept my mouth shut." Ethan studied him and found something human behind the foolishness. "You're late with good news, but I'll take it." Buck swallowed. "I tore down the sheriff's letter last night. Amos tacked it up again with new nails and less patience." "I ain't proud. You have time to be a different neighbor," Ethan said. "Do I? Same way a fence becomes straight one rail at a time." That night a sound on the porch scraped the house awake. Ethan's hand found the Colt before his feet found the floor. Clara's breathing went from sleeping to choosing. He lifted the latch and eased the door a whisper. Moonlight poured like water. In the middle of the yard, inside, the shadow stripes of the fence, an ace of spades lay stabbed through with a square nail, a stone keeping the insult from drifting. Clara joined him. "He wants you to come find him," she murmured. "Tomorrow," Ethan said. He walked out, pocketed the card, replaced the stone, and came back with dust ghosting his boots. They did not sleep much. Dawn arrived as an order. Ethan saddled his horse and buckled his belt. Clara tied a dark blue handkerchief around his wrist, fingers quick and certain. "For luck," she said. "I'll bring it back dirty," he promised. Sheriff Amos had the door open before Ethan knocked. Buck smelled like confession when he came by. "I've got Baker and Danny. Dry Creek, cut by 10. You ain't going alone. I don't need an army." "You don't get one," Amos said. "You get men who listen." Dry Creek cut wore yesterday's boots. 6 horses in 6 out. A length of tripwire coiled by a juniper like a snake ashamed of itself. "Jake wanted you riding," Angry Amos said, straightening. "You didn't. That breaks his first plan." They rode home the long way so the wind could think. When Ethan turned into Cottonwood Lane, the air smelled of coffee soap and a memory of flame. Smoke ghosts still smudged the back stoop. They tried to burn the step, Clara said, rag and water bucket beside her. Dampwood refused to cooperate. He touched the charred rail. It flaked like a lie that hadn't baked long enough. "Anyone see Tommy saw the smoke? I sent him to the sheriff." He ran as if errand running paid a bonus. Ethan took her hands without remembering to be cautious. "You should have stayed inside." "I was inside," she said, not unkind. "Then the house needed me." He swallowed the argument that wanted saying and used the part that knew better. "We'll string wire and bells." "We will," she said. "We'll move the bed out here. We can watch the door without pretending we're doing something else." At dusk, they tied bells to low rails with twine and set a pan to balance on the back step like a fragile judge. Inside, they dragged the narrow bed into the main room, pushed the table against the far wall, and left the Winchester, where reaching wouldn't require thought. Malcolm arrived with a parcel of ham and a face full of loyalty. He took in the bells, the pan, the bed, and put aside the lecture he had every right to give. "I brought meat and caution," he said. "Eat the first, keep the second." "Jake wanted us hot," Ethan said. Amos carried water. "Mean men mistake echoes for truth," Malcolm replied. He put his hand on Ethan's shoulder weight of a father offered before it was owed. "When trouble knocks, answer with 2 voices. Don't let it split you." After he left the house, folded itself smaller and warmer. Clara asked for poker lessons and learned too fast. By the 4th hand, she called a bluff Ethan hadn't noticed he'd made. By the 5th, she raked a pot with a pair of 2s, and a look that could have wrung juice from a cactus. "Your thumb taps your knee when your heart tries to run," she said, amused. "I didn't know that." "I did," she said softly. "That's what partners are for." The first bell rang near midnight, one brittle chime, as if a spoon had struck a thought. Ethan was standing before the sound finished. Clara had the rifle and the angle. The pan clattered, once hushed itself. A shadow slid along the wall and withdrew, careful as regret. Scout Ethan breathed. Too careful for Jake. Clara agreed. They waited long enough to be sure caution had left with the intruder, then returned to uneasy, resting the fire, a small orange argument that refused to quit. They were still half awake when dawn whitened the curtains and a firm knock sounded on the blue door. Ethan looked at Clara. She nodded and moved aside, rifle hidden, but near. Buck stood on the porch with his hat in his hands and a bruise starting to ink his cheek. Tommy Chen hovered behind him, breathing victory and dust. "Jake's hitting the payroll stage tomorrow," Buck said without flourish. "Noon, Red Butte Pass. Silas Pike and 3 more. He means to send a false fire downriver to draw the sheriff and then take the strongbox when the road's only got money and nerves." Tommy blurted, "I heard it at the livery." The scarred man bought oats with money that looked like it wanted to confess. Ethan glanced at Clara, whose eyes had gone thoughtful and still. "There's a reason you told us, not Amos," he said to Buck. "Because I ain't sure Amos will hear me yet," Buck said. "And because men listen when you say the same words I say." "He'll listen if you come," Ethan replied. "You asked if there was time to be a different kind of neighbor. There is. It's now." Buck stared at the toe of his boot like the answer might be etched there. When he lifted his head, something had been decided. "All right," he said. "I'll go." "I'll pack bread and jerky and water," Clara said briskly, already turning. "Don't walk into someone else's plan hungry." Tommy bounced. "Can I run notes, Mrs. Cole? You said to bring nerve Saturday." "I brought it early." "You'll run between the sheriff and the livery and my father," Clara said. "You won't follow guns." Tommy's disappointment lasted exactly as long as it took him to imagine being essential. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and bolted like a letter with legs. At the threshold, Ethan paused. "We'll stop him." Clara tied the indigo handkerchief tighter at his wrist, reducing luck to something with a knot. "Bring it home dirty," she said. "Bring yourself home whole." He nodded, and he and Buck walked the main street side by side, 2 histories choosing a joint sentence. The sheriff's door opened at the first knock. He heard them out with a face like a ledger, columns of doubt and columns of sense, and then started filling cartridges. "We post Baker at the pass overlook, Danny at the split me at the box. Ethan with me," Amos said already, moving pieces on air like a quiet general. "Buck, you ride decoy, visible enough to be tempting, slippery enough to make them chase. We want Jake angry and moving uphill into a bad angle." Buck swallowed. "I can be tempting. Don't dress the part," Amos warned. "Just be you." They drilled what they could drill: signals, fallbacks, how to name a rock, so everyone saw the same rock. Before noon, the plan could stand on its own feet. Before sundown, it had learned to walk. Ethan took the long way home to let the hours shake out of him. The lane was quiet, Bells motionless, the pan asleep. Inside the house smelled of bread, ham, and resolve. Clara had moved the rifle rack a single pace lower so she could reach it faster. She had turned the bed so a man waking would see door, window, and stove with one turn of his head. It was a small geometry of safety, and it made Ethan feel both proud and unworthy. "They'll try for the stage at noon," he said. "I made you a pocket lunch that isn't an apology," she replied. "And a second handkerchief in case the first does more work than it wants to." He sat, and for a minute, neither of them was brave. They held hands with their elbows on their knees, the way 2 tired people hold the same prayer. The fire ticked. A sparrow tried out 3 notes and decided to keep them. When they let go, it felt less like losing and more like handing each other back what had been borrowed. Saturday, Clara said, forcing lightness into the room because the room needed it, "I will teach women not to flinch." "You already taught one man," Ethan said. "You weren't the lesson," she answered. "You were the answer." They ate cleaned plates, set the lamp low, and lay down in the bed they had dragged into the middle of their life. Outside, the cottonwoods rehearsed the sound leaves make when they're relieved. Inside, embers kept faith till morning. They rose before the sun burned the chill off the yard. Ethan strapped on his belt. Clara checked the rifle and the shell tins and reset the bells with fingers that had learned neatness from necessity. No speeches. The day was already full. "Come back," she said at the door, as if asking the weather to be merciful. "I will," he said, "because sometimes the strongest vow is the one you fulfill." He left, and the blue door caught the light like a good memory. Clara watched him down the lane until horse and man became the same dust, then closed the door and got to work. She swept the stoop-folded blankets, checked the pan, counted the shells. She wrote a note to Malcolm: "Pay Tommy for running. Teach Alma the difference between powder and courage. Bring more nails and set it under a mug where a busy father would find it." At the table, she laid out bread, jerky, and apples in a neat row, then sat a minute with her palms open as if cooling them on the morning. She did not pray words exactly. She made a promise with breath. We keep what the storm left. We keep each other. We hold the town if it lets us. The bells were still. The room was ordinary. The rifle gleamed a little where the angled light found the barrel. Outside the lane was bright and brittle, a strip of sun stretched taut. Red Butte Pass was out there learning its part of the script. Back here, Clara rehearsed the part she had chosen: teach women to aim, remind men that steadiness is not quiet, and meet the door with both hands when it opened at dusk. Far off, a hawk scribbled circles on the sky. Nearer, the cottonwoods nodded yes to something that hadn't been said aloud. The day lifted its shoulders and began. The morning came up raw and red over Red Butte Pass, a thin blade of light shaving the desert down to its hard essentials. Wind moved early, dry, metallic, tasting like a nail held too long between the teeth. Ethan Cole looped the reins over the hitch rail outside the sheriff's office and pulled his sleeve back past the elbow. The bandage Clara had wrapped the night before lay snug over the graze on his forearm. Beneath it, the indigo handkerchief she'd tied around his wrist made a small, stubborn square of color in a world that preferred dust. Sheriff Amos Morrison stepped into the doorway, a tall, unhurried outline against the dim interior. He carried a Winchester in the plain way a carpenter carries a hammer. "Stage rolls at 11, he said, voice level as a plumb line. "Buck rides ahead to get their attention. We take the rim. They'll bite if they believe the box is soft." Buck Morrison arrived with his hat tilted to work against the glare. His grin showed too much gum to be bravery and too little to be fear. "Jake won't pass a clean target," he said. "He never could." "Then we make sure it's not clean," Ethan answered. He checked the Colt, spun the cylinder with 2 fingers, felt the heavy, familiar notch of each chamber coming home. The habit steadied him the way a hymn steadies a church. They rode before town had fully agreed to wake hooves ticking a quiet metronome over boards and hardpan. Past the church, past the Lucky Star, with its door still hanging last night's music, past the blacksmith's yard, where a dog lifted its head, considered duty, and let it pass. Coyote Ridge fell behind them like a story told for the 50th time. Red Butte rose ahead, the first sentence in a new one. On the rim, they dismounted, leading the horses into the shadow of high rock. From there, the road bent below like a question mark no one wanted to answer. Sage wore the pale green of things that insist on living. Heat shimmered off stone, making the world look like it was thinking about changing shape. "We wait," Amos said, and the desert obeyed him. Waiting had its sounds, leather settling and resettling a fly, changing its mind, the faint rehearsals of distant quail. Ethan thought of the blue door on Cottonwood Lane, of Clara's fingers last night, at the lamp, quick and precise. As she tied the bandage, the knot, a small oath. "Walk in sober," she'd said. "Let truth do your fighting." He'd kissed her forehead and felt the practical warmth of her skin. Now the memory sat inside him like a steadying hand. Hoofbeats arrived, as rumor becomes fact. The stage showed first a wagon box rattling 4 bays, throwing up pale dust, the driver a man arguing with physics and time. Buck loped 100 yards ahead, easy in the saddle, one hand low, the other high enough to be seen by men looking for a reason. Then came the outlaws, the way thunder comes after lightning, late enough to worry you, close enough to count. 5 riders. Jake Thornton in front with his grin carved under a scar, the grin of a man who believes this time is the punchline he is owed. Beside him, Silas Pike, broad through the chest hat, brim straight as a ruler, the look of a fence post that hated cattle. 3 more leaned into speed faces like locked doors. Now, Amos said, and the morning broke. Rifles, cracked handguns, barked the pass, coughed dust like smoke. Buck cut left the way a memory cuts a heart sharply without apology. Bullets tugged at the air where he'd been. Amos's first shot flattened one of the shadows who slid from his saddle like a coat coming off a hook. Ethan's Colt came up by itself. 2 pulls, 2 answers. Silas reeled in the saddle blood, making a dark vowel on his sleeve. The rider behind him pitched slantwise, as if the world had mispronounced him. Jake came on. He always had. That was the thing about certain men, their faith in forward was religious. He leaned over his horse's neck, firing teeth, bright eyes narrow the way coyotes look when hunger is old enough to be habit. Stone spat fragments past Ethan's ear. The smell of powder put a copper edge on the air. The pass narrowed into a throat of rock where men went one by one whether they wanted to or not. In that tightness, time got elastic. Ethan felt every grain of grit under his boot, every pound of the Colt, every inch of breath. Jake fired and missed. Ethan moved and didn't. There's a geometry to shooting a man who means to shoot you back, angles and rhythms, and the small, treacherous music of another boy's elbow when it lifts just a hair too high. "Drop it," Ethan called, "because you say the right thing even when you know the right thing won't be heard." Still lucky, Cole Jake shouted the words bright with disdain and something that might have been admiration in a different life. "Still here," Ethan said, and put the front sight where truth lives. The Colt bucked. The sound that followed filled the pass and then rolled away toward country that did not care. Jake staggered, his pistol falling from his hand as if it had remembered gravity all at once. He stayed upright, a heartbeat longer than most men would have, as if stubbornness could argue with physics, then made his decision and met the dirt. Silence doesn't arrive all at once after gunfire. It drips. First the horses blow, then a rock decides to finish falling, then clothing quits its small exclamations. After that there is a gate you walk through, and on the other side is the ordinary world, hot, dusty, unastonished. Amos came forward with the slow certainty of a man counting to the same number every time. He knelt, checked the not breath, glanced at Ethan's arm. "You're leaking," he said. "Enough to prove I was there," Ethan answered, looking down at the small red insistence working through the bandage. It hurt, but pain was an old acquaintance and had learned not to shout to be heard. Silas lay face down. Where he'd fallen, the width of him somehow lessened, now that the argument was over. The third man Amos had put down had that blank, strange peace, unrecognizable to men still alive. The other two who'd ridden with Jake had found the better part of valor and taken it. They were already dust at the far end of the pass. They buried what they could not carry. Red stones, a small stack of witness for each. No sermon, just the wind doing its long, patient work. Buck stood a thin minute over Jake's cairn and let his mouth do what his heart did not know how to do. "He was my friend," once he said. Then let him rest like one Ethan told him, and the words felt less like mercy than like proper bookkeeping. They sent the stage on with Amos, and the box, the driver, nodding gratitude like a man who'd been overcharged, and then surprised to receive exact change. Buck and Ethan turned their horses toward Coyote Ridge, letting the pace be what a day like this required. Heat carried a promise of rain the way a gambler carries a tell, reluctant but there. Clara was in the garden when they came into Cottonwood Lane. Knees in the dirt, sleeves rolled, hair unpinned, because an honest woman can't do everything and keep all the proper things attached. She had her hands around the base of a rosebush she had refused to pronounce dead. The sight of the two men, one bandaged and dusty, the other hatless and odd with relief, stood her up taller than she was. She ran. Ethan stepped down in a single motion and met her halfway. Up close, the sweat on his temple smelled like iron, and something gentler he could never name. Clara's fingers found the wet spot on his sleeve and pressed there, not hard, just enough to test the truth. "You're hurt?" she said, voice steady, but holding a tremble on a short leash. "Scratched," he answered. He wanted to tell her the exact angle of the bullet and the precise depth of the graze and the microcosm of luck that lives between sight picture and squeeze. Instead, he said the thing that would set the rest of the day right. "It's over." All of it, she asked, and the town, the months, the storm, the saloon, the vows, the garden, the night on the sofa, the bells on the rail, all hung on the answer. "Enough of it," he said. She exhaled and put her forehead against his chest, staying there exactly the time it takes a kettle to think about boiling and decide against it. When she lifted her head, the relief had done its first work, and now dignity took over. She gave Buck a look that was not unkind, and made even a fool feel like a man again. "Sheriff says the county will write a reward," Buck offered, needing to place words between two people reunited. "I told him money spends easier when a town is quiet. Sleep spends easiest of all, Ethan said. Buck nodded like a man who had tried both and learned the cost. Amos, arriving in a cloud of road and gratitude after seeing the stage safe past town, tipped his hat at the scene in the garden and chose a sentence that would not press too hard. Town will talk, he said. Best to let them. If they're talking decent, they ain't drinking angry. That's near a proverb, Clara answered, and Amos, who loved a short sermon, let himself smile. After the sheriff rode off, the yard resumed its ordinary side. They went back to what work was left of the day. Clara pressed new seeds into soft soil, laying each one like a small claim staked for the future. Ethan cut and reset a charred bit of porch rail that the night visitors had worried with flame. He smoothed the cut with the back of his knife until the grain lay courteous again. They ate stew at the table, the blue door standing open to catch a breeze. The meat had the tenderness of something that had learned to be patient. Bread carried butter the way a good story carries grief without spilling. After Ethan washed and Clara dried, they switched without comment because the night was theirs and had room for good manners. When the lamp found the low setting, and the house became the kind of dark that keeps, Ethan walked out onto the porch. And Saturday Clara joined him with 2 cups, and her shoulder exactly where it belonged against his arm. "What will you do with peace if it stays a while?" she asked. He considered the question like a map. "I might build things that are no use in a hurry," he said. "A wider table, a better fence, a shelf that expects books." "Books have been waiting on you," she said. "I've been waiting on me," he answered. Her hand found his, and her thumb drew one slow, thoughtless circle at the base of his thumb, the way a sparrow tests air before it commits. Far beyond the ridge, a quiet lightning rehearsed its lines without lightning's usual ambition. The cottonwoods answered with leaf sounds that did not require words. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked finally. "Not the kiss at the altar, but the week before the bet, the bargain that wasn't one." "Some nights I regretted the world," she said. "But I never regretted believing you would keep your word." She turned her head and looked at him full, the way a person looks who has decided to keep a promise she has not yet spoken. "That doesn't mean you didn't make me earn it." "I was busy being a fool," he said. "Fools keep towns in practice," she replied dryly, and he laughed softly in the way men laugh who decide not to be offended. Rain came on cat feet after midnight, soft as a hand smoothing hair. The house took it well. The mended roof held its tongue. In the morning the world was rinsed. The lane wore a darker brown, and the ridgeline had borrowed a piece of New Mexico's blue. Clara went out early barefoot to feel the proof. Mud cooled the memory of yesterday's heat. The rose had found the point between alive and only pretending. A tight red bud had written its first sentence. She crouched and read it closely with her fingertips. Ethan stepped into the doorway with coffee and the satisfied look a man wears when the day owes him nothing yet. He came down the step, and behind her, his free hand fitting at her waist, not proprietary but allied. "Looks like it made it," he said. "Like us," she answered. They stood long enough to teach the morning patience. Somewhere, up the lane, a wagon creaked. Somewhere down the street, a piano tested a scale, chose against it, and put on coffee instead. The town bell rang twice a plain hour, no alarm. "What will you plant next?" Clara asked. "Because naming a thing has always been the first work of making it true," Hope Ethan said. "It seems to take root easier near you." She smiled without looking away from the rose. "Then don't forget to water it." He lifted the cup between them, and they both drank. Saturday showed up dressed in expectation. The women came 2 by 2 and 3 by 3 to the bare lot behind the livery, each carrying a rifle like a question. Dresses pinned practical hair, braided to keep it from arguing with the wind. Mrs. Henderson brought targets she'd painted from pasteboard, big white circles with smaller black hearts at their centers. Alma Pike arrived late with a hat too large for the work and a look that said she would rather be told to go home than be told to watch. Clara stepped onto the line with the Winchester low and polite in her hands. "Guns are loud ways to tell the truth," she said. "We are going to tell it carefully." She showed them the stance weight where God could use its shoulders, soft elbows, not advertised. She taught them to breathe on the exhale and to see not the whole target, but the smallest piece that would change everything. The first salvo sounded like a town clearing its throat. Then the adjustments began. Heels turned thumbs, corrected cheeks, resting not bracing. By the third round, women were hitting on purpose and smiling despite themselves. Mrs. Henderson split the painted heart with a shot that made her laugh exactly once, and then pretend she'd meant to do that the whole time. Alma flinched at her first boom, swore under her breath like a woman mending a tear, and then kept both eyes open and sent a tin can into a new career. Ethan waited by the fence with Nail's extra cartridges and the look men wear when they are proud in a way that does not need remark. When the sun slid to a better-than-noon angle, he brought water and slices of bread smeared with jam and passed the plate to hands still warm from recoil. The women received without apology. Something in the empty lot changed shape, as if the ground had decided to hold more than it used to. By afternoon word had spread in the way good news is lazy and still wins the race. Men drifted in at the edge, hands in pockets, faces polite. The sheriff leaned on the livery post and let a public smile show itself. "I told you not to argue with her students," he murmured to Ethan. "I only argue when I expect to win," Ethan said. When the last target had been mended and the last rifle wiped down with oil that smelled faintly of oranges, Clara stacked the pasteboard, thanked each woman by name, and promised next Saturday at the same hour. Promises are heavier than rifles. The women carried both well. On Sunday, the Reverend preached on meekness and inherited earth, and half the church sat taller because meekness had grown a new backbone. After in the yard, boys flipped pennies and caught them with whoops, and men discussed fence wire and calves and the price of flour that had decided to be proud. Mrs. Henderson cornered Ethan and told him she would bring a bolt of muslin and make curtains for the church hall that did not look like regret. Ethan said, "Very good, the way men say it when they have learned that some trains should be encouraged to run on time." By midweek, the garden stunned them with speed. The beans found the poles with a kind of certainty that made human vows look timid. The onions were the quiet workers they had always been. Even the patch where Ethan's drunken boots had once taught ruin began to forget a little each day, writing over the old harm with the green cursive of forgiveness. In the evenings, Ethan repaired things that had not asked to be mended, planed a table edge that had learned to throb, set new hinges on a cupboard door that squeaked a complaint at supper and then felt better, carved a shallow shelf for books Clara kept in a stack in her storeroom. He hung the shelf where lamplight could make a companion of print. She stood back and put a thin volume and a thick one there, and then a thinner one just because the shelf looked too proud. "Read to me," he said, because the sound of her doing that had already become a reason to live. She read, and the words arranged themselves in the room not like visitors, but like furniture. Outside, the cottonwoods tried on night and found it fit. Sometimes late, Ethan walked out alone and let the lane inform him about himself. He had a habit of counting doors in the dark, who slept behind them, who owed what to whom, which houses kept bells on their rails now, because they had seen what he had seen. He felt the itch of old roads in his boots and did not scratch. He thought of Jake and the cairn under the red rock, and did not pretend the man had not once shared a laugh with him. He let memory print its photographs and then filed them where they could be opened without ambush. On a Wednesday, he went to Buck's place on the edge of town with a hammer and a coil of wire. "Fence needs truing," he said, because men begin with nouns when they mean to end with verbs. Buck looked at the fence and then at Ethan and then at his boots. "I been meaning," he said. "Meaning's cheap. Nails are dear," Ethan answered, and they got to work. The line was not long and not short, but by sundown it was straight, and when Buck breathed, it sounded less like a man learning and more like a man remembering. "You think a man can be somebody and also a better version of himself?" Later, Buck asked finally, as if the fence might object. "I am counting on it," Ethan said. They shook hands without ceremony and parted like boys who had not yet agreed to be enemies. On Friday, Malcolm Dawson brought a crate, a question, and a father's face. The crate turned out to be jars. The question turned out to be about preserving peaches, and the face turned out to be relief, disguised as irritation. "You two building a life or a museum?" he asked from the doorway, eyes flicking over the shelf. The repaired rail, the garden that was already gossip among plants. "We're practicing," Clara said. "When we get good, we'll open to the public." Malcolm stood a long second in the room, where his daughter had made her own weather. "I dreamt for years of bringing you curtains," he told her, unexpected softness in the line of his mouth. "Turns out you didn't need curtains. You needed a man who understood the door." "She opened it," Ethan said, "because truth is oak and stands." Malcolm nodded once, as if a ledger balanced, then left the jars, because jars are always part of the answer. Nights settled into a kind of liturgy. They ate, they spoke, they mended, they read, they put out the lamp, and the house slept as if sleep were a friend again. Sometimes the world knocked anyway, but now it tended to bring bread or news or a chair to fix. One evening, as the sun lay down behind the ridge with a sigh a man might make after a hard kindness, Ethan brought out the small tin that had held the ace of spades, jabbed through with a square nail on the night the threats were easy. He took the card out and set it on the table. The hole through its heart had browned at the edges the way wounds do that decide not to kill you. Clara looked at it and then at him. "Keep it," she asked, not scornful. "Not as a shrine," he said. "As a receipt." He turned the card over and wrote in his smallest, careful hand, "Paid in full." Then he put it back in the tin, and the tin back on the shelf behind the second book, because a man should know where his past is, and also keep it where it cannot tip over on him in the night. On the last day of the week, the rose opened all the way. It was not the finest rose the world had ever seen. It was the finest rose Ethan had ever seen. They stood for a time with their hands not quite touching, and let the brainless excellence of petals cure them of a few things they had not noticed they still carried. "Funny," Ethan said, "how a town can be the size of a hat, a rumor, and a rose." "Add a door," Clara said, "and that's a country." He laughed, and the sound went out into the yard and up into the tree, where it became a bird for a breath or two, and then returned as something like courage. That night, in the small bedroom that had stopped apologizing for itself, the window opened to a stripe of cooler air. They lay on their backs, and let the kind of quiet between two people who have chosen each other do the work. He touched the circle of her wrist where pulse lives. She touched the inside of his elbow where tenderness makes a home. Neither of them hurried. The lamp made a small, polite halo on the wall. He turned his head and found her looking not through him but at him, which is a rarer thing. Once he said, "I thought a life was what you win. Now I think it's what you keep." She smiled in the dim. "Keep me then," she said. It was a command and a permission. "I will," he answered. And because he had learned, he added, "And I will keep being kept by you." They slept. The house did too. Out in the garden, the rose held its small red moon, as if watching where a job flowers could volunteer for. The cottonwoods whispered the kind things the world says when it is newly convinced of you. In the morning, the town bell would ring an ordinary hour. The women would come again next Saturday. Buck would keep the fence straight one more week. Malcolm would bring 2 jars too few on purpose, so that coming back would not feel like need. The sheriff would nod once from his office door, and count the days since trouble had tried to learn their address. And Ethan Cole, gambler, drifter, husband, student of shelves and fences and roses, would walk out into the morning light with a hand that smelled like coffee and cedar, and take up the work of staying, which is the hardest work, a certain kind of man ever learns, and the only work worth doing once he's learned it. Because sometimes a gunshot ends a chapter, but a garden begins a book. And if you are lucky enough to be loved by a quiet woman whose voice has learned to be a bell, the book keeps finding ways to say the same honest thing: you are here, you are kept, grow. The rains came slow that year, not fierce, like the spring storm that had torn their roof before, but soft and steady, a forgiveness falling one drop at a time. The desert grass turned the color of old brass, and along Cottonwood Lane the air smelled like wet earth and smoke from kitchen fires. Ethan Cole had learned to wake with the light, no longer from habit of danger, but because peace demanded its own kind of discipline. He'd rise before the rooster in town, remembered to crow, make the morning coffee, check the fence, feed the horses, and come back inside, just as Clara was stirring under the quilt. Some mornings, she'd pretend to still be asleep just to listen to the slow sounds of him moving about the house. The clink of a mug, the low hum of some tune. He didn't know he was humming. It was the sound of safety, something neither of them had grown up believing in. They'd been married 3 months now by paper and by town record, but time felt different in that house with the blue door. It didn't rush or demand. It simply stayed. One morning, as the first chill of autumn slipped through the valley, Clara stood on the porch with a cup of coffee. The horizon blushed pink where the sky met the dry hills. "Feels like everything's learning how to breathe again," she said. Ethan stepped beside her, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "You too," she smiled. "Maybe." He looked at her, then at the woman who had once spoken only when forced to, who now taught half the women in town how to shoot, how to aim, how to stand without apology. There was still quiet in her, but it wasn't silence anymore. It was composure. "Got something to show you," Ethan said. He led her around the house toward the patch of land behind the barn. The soil had been turned dark, an even fence newly built. A hand-painted sign hung crooked on the post. Cole and Dawson Gardens. Vegetables. Flowers. Truths. Clara laughed, eyes wide. "You made a sign." He scratched the back of his neck. "I might have borrowed the idea from your class. Figure if the women can learn to shoot straight, the men can learn to grow something worth keeping." "Vegetables and truths?" she asked. "Can't sell one without the other," he said, smiling. "You teach 'em how to hit what matters. I'll teach 'em how to keep their hands busy when they ain't fighting." She reached up, touched his cheek. "You've gone soft." He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "Maybe. But soft things grow, hard things break." She didn't argue. She only nodded. By November, the first shoots pushed through the soybeans, squash, and small yellow flowers that Clara couldn't name but loved anyway. The townsfolk came curious, pretending not to be impressed. "Who'd have thought the gunslinger had a green thumb?" someone said. "Maybe the lady taught him," someone else replied. Ethan didn't mind the talk. He'd long learned that people always needed stories to fill their quiet. If they wanted to tell one about him turning soil instead of blood, he'd let them. Some days, he still rode the fence line alone, checking for breaks or stray cattle. The hills carried a different kind of sound. Now not thunder or galloping, but birds whined through the reeds, the creak of his own saddle. Sometimes he'd stop at Jake Thornton's cairn on the ridge. The stones had weathered down the desert, swallowing his name without spite. Ethan would stand there a moment, hat in hand, and murmur, "You were right about me once, Jake, but you should have stuck around to see the ending." Then he'd ride back home, to the garden, to Clara, to the smell of baking bread and whatever story the evening wanted to tell. Winter came, light and cold. Snow dusted the ridges once or twice, but never stayed long. Inside the Blue Door house grew warmer, smaller, safer. On New Year's morning, Clara found Ethan at the table, pen in hand, paper folded neat before him. "Writing letters?" she asked. He nodded. "One to the sheriff, one to Buck." What about leaving the past where it lies?" he said. "And about coming spring, I'm thinking of building a small school near the church. Sheriff says the county might pay for it. Place where women can learn to shoot, men can learn to read, and children can learn both." Clara tilted her head, surprised. "You're serious." "Deadly," he said with a grin. She sat across from him, eyes searching his face. "I never thought I'd marry a man who wanted to build a school." He laughed. "I never thought I'd marry at all. Guess we both lost a bet. Best one I ever lost." By February, the church hall had its first wall. Amos brought lumber, Buck hauled nails, Malcolm Dawson carved benches. The women painted signs that read, "Learning is another kind of aim." Coyote Ridge was changing, not loudly, but deeply, like water seeping into cracked ground. People lingered longer at markets, argued less at bars, prayed with their eyes open. One evening after supper, Clara walked the garden path alone. The moon was full, lighting the rows silver. She could still hear the echo of hammers from the half-built schoolhouse. Somewhere inside her chest, something new and gentle stirred. Not excitement, not fear, but a quiet knowing. She pressed a hand to her belly. Ethan found her standing there, still as a post. "You all right?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes glimmering. "Ethan," she said softly, "I think we're going to be 3. For a moment the world stopped. Even the wind seemed to listen. Then Ethan stepped forward, his hand finding hers, his other coming to rest, just above where her apron tied. His voice broke before it steadied. 3, he repeated, like the word itself was holy. You sure? She nodded. He let out a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half joy. Guess I'll need a bigger garden. Clara smiled through the tears. Guess so. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, whispering something she couldn't quite catch, but felt in every part of her. That night, as the fire burned low, Ethan sat by the window long after she'd fallen asleep, watching the stars. His mind went back to every